This is Bitnar Talks, the engineer takes on construction. Episode 29. Hi, I'm Piotr Bitnar. Each day I help my clients plan and design building projects through Bitnar Limited, a consulting chartered structural engineer's practice. My biggest passion and the cornerstone on which I've built my business is finding clever solutions for construction projects. I am a chartered structural engineer and a budding software developer, so you can rest assured that I will strive to talk about the best practices and the use of new technologies in the industry. And if you're embarking on a construction project or are involved in planning, designing and building the world around us, you'll find this podcast useful. Approved Document M. Access to and Use of Buildings, Volume 1, Dwellings. Hi and welcome to Bitnar Talks, your favorite podcast on all matters of architecture, engineering and construction. It is Friday the 20th of September 2024 and I'm here back with you with the 29th episode and information on Approved Document M, Access to and Use of Buildings, Volume 1, Dwellings. It's been quite a busy month thus far. Planning applications, building control applications, structural designs, detailings of steel structures, reports, meetings, networking, and most of all, making preparations for Kent Construction Expo, which will be held at Maidstone Detling Showgrounds on the 4th of October. So in less than 2 weeks really. Bear with me with that patchy delivery, but hey, where else can you listen to what is included in building regulations? Anywhere else than here? I doubt so. If you are visiting this year, come to stand 365 for a chat. 365 days a year, we stand in your corner. The last episode was another long one, so I hope that to recap this one quickly and move forward to the one of today. In the last episode, I talked about the first volume of Approved Document L, Conservation of Fuel and Power, dealing with buildings other than dwellings. These requirements are contained within 2L requirements and 17 additional regulations covered in 12 sections of the document. Section 1. This is the introduction which overlaps with Volume 1 with distinctions for different building types and stages of execution like shell and core, modular construction, and then when we get to second fix in that shell and core. It also covers exemptions for specific buildings and notes the necessity of integrating this document with other building regulations. Section 1. This section details the calculation of target primary energy and emission rates using standard specifications for a notional building. The results must be compared with as designed and as built rates and communicated to building control. Section 2 focuses on calculating the building's actual primary energy and emission rates, stressing the accuracy of as built calculations, particularly with multiple fuel sources. Special attention is given to district heating systems and system management improvements. Section 3. This section tells us about the mandatory assessment of high-efficiency alternative systems, requiring reports on their technical, environmental and economic feasibility. These reports provide an insight for building control authorities and the insight into possible upgrades. Section 4 covers fabric performance regarding heat gains and losses, setting specific U-value limits for building elements. It concentrates on minimizing thermal bridging, maximizing airtightness, and minimizing solar gains while addressing insulation and energy loss in running of services. Section 5 establishes minimum efficiency standards for building services, ensuring new and replacement systems meet regulatory requirements. The section stresses proper sizing, control, and maintenance of systems, along with the need for energy meters for accurate monitoring. Section 6 outlines energy efficiency requirements for various building systems such as boilers, heat pumps, and ventilation. Efficiency standards vary based on fuel type and system capacity, with guidance on control systems and technologies like combined heat and power CHPs and lighting. Section 7 sets air permeability standard at 8 cubic meters per hour per meter square at 50 pascals and provides guidelines for testing and exemptions. Testing must be conducted by qualified personnel and specific requirements apply to complex buildings. Results need to be submitted to building control. Section 8 requires commissioning of fixed building services to ensure energy efficient operation aligned with CIBSE's Commissioning Code M. A commissioning plan and notification of completion must be submitted to building control, documented any deviations from expected performance. Section 9 mandates the provision of a building logbook in line with CIBSE's TM31, detailing energy efficient operations, maintenance and commissioning records. Large buildings over 1,000 meters square must include an energy use forecast with logbook updates required after system modifications. Section 10 tells us about new elements in existing buildings which must meet current energy performance standards, with extensions over 100 meters square treated as new builds. Compliance can be demonstrated through area-weighted U values calculations or approved calculations methods. Section 11 deals with renovations or material change of affecting energy use that must improve thermal performance to meet specific U values. Significant renovations involving over 50% of an element's surface require upgrades to the entire element. Section 12 tells us that for buildings over 1,000 meters square undergoing extensions or significant system upgrades, the significant system upgrades must include consequential improvements to enhance energy performance. These improvements must be feasible and involve a minimum spend of 10% of the principal works costs. In this episode, I will move to approved document M, Access to and Use of Buildings, Volume 1, Dwellings. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this. In this episode, I will talk about the statutory guidance contained within the approved document M, Access to and Use of Buildings, Volume 1, Dwellings. The requirements of Part M are contained within 4 parts, but only the Part 4 is applicable to dwellings. I will therefore start with reading you the requirement M4 paragraphs and then move to what is covered in the approved document. The episode will follow the structure of previous episodes dealing with the approved document, so first the text of legislation, then sections 0, 1, 2 and 3. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this approved document. Alright guys, starting with the text of the legislation. Access to and use of dwellings. Category 1. Visitable dwellings. Requirement M4.1. Reasonable provision must be made for people to A. Gain access to and B. Use the dwelling and its facilities. Category 2. Accessible and adaptable dwellings. Requirement M4.2. Optional requirement. Point 1. Reasonable provision must be made for people to A. Gain access to and B. Use the dwelling and its facilities. Point 2. The provision made must be sufficient to A. Meet the needs of occupants with different needs, including some older or disabled people, and B. To allow adaptation of the dwelling to meet the changing needs of occupants over time. Category 3. Wheelchair use of dwellings. That's requirement M4.3. Optional requirement. Point 1. Reasonable provision must be made for people to A. Gain access to and B. Use the dwelling and its facilities. Point 2. The provision made must be sufficient to A. Allow simple adaptation of the dwelling to meet the needs of occupants who use wheelchairs, or B. meet the needs of occupants who use wheelchairs. Now, requirement M4.1 does not apply to A. an extension to a dwelling, or B. any part of a building that is used solely to enable the building or any service or fitting in the building to be inspected, repaired, or maintained. Optional requirement M4.2 A. may apply only in relation to dwelling that is erected. B. will apply in substitution for requirement M4.1. C. does not apply where optional requirement M4.3 applies. D. does not apply to any part of a building that is used solely to enable the building or any service or fitting in the building to be inspected, repaired, or maintained. Optional requirement M4.3.A may apply only in relation to a dwelling that is erected. B. will apply in substitution for requirement M4.1. C. does not apply where optional requirement M4.2 applies. D. does not apply to any part of a building that is used solely to enable the building or any service or fitting in the building to be inspected, repaired, or maintained. Optional requirement M4.3.2b applies only where the planning permission under which the building work is carried out specifies it shall be complied with. So simples, isn't it? It will usually be only the requirement M4.1 that we need to observe unless otherwise stipulated by the planning permission. As ever, the document starts with an introduction to the document contained within section 0. The document is contained within 3 sections otherwise, covering visitable dwellings, accessible and adaptable dwellings, and wheelchair-use dwellings. The recommendations of this document do not apply to extensions but to new dwellings and dwellings undergoing material alteration only. We are obliged to inform building control if there are any optional requirements attached to the planning permission and to which dwelling if stated in the planning approval. The access to the dwelling should follow the optional requirements when applicable. Mixed-use buildings will need to follow the recommendations of the Volume 2 for the common areas, and we may also need to check the Workplace Regulations and the Equality Act to satisfy the letter of law. As ever, when undergoing material alteration, the building cannot be worse off than it was before, and historic buildings' adaptability should be balanced with its historical merit. We are also informed that Part M takes precedence over Part K requirements, but when we are to make the approach to the building more convenient by a ramp, in more convenient fashion by a ramp or a level access, we should mind requirement C also. Now, Section 1 deals with Category 1 visitable dwellings, and in the Secretary of State's opinion, the building satisfied the Secretary of State is satisfied that the dwelling or dwellings can be reasonably accessed by a disabled person who can walk from the likely alighting point from the car. The toilet is available at the entry story if there is a habitable room at this story, or otherwise on the principal story. Bathroom access from the habitable room at the entry story should be step-free, and wall-mounted switches and socket outlets in habitable rooms should be accessible to people with reduced reach. Section 1 is divided into Part A and Part B, dealing with the approach to the dwelling and private entrances and spaces within the dwellings, consecutively. Section 1A applies to the external and internal areas within the curtilage of the dwelling or the development if the car parking does not form part of the curtilage. The whole idea is for a person to reach the dwelling safely, live in a car. The approach should be at least 900 mm wide and unobtrusive, gentle, firm, not slippery, and only stepped if unavoidable. Crossfall of maximum 1 in 40. Gradient. If the external approach needs to be ramped, the individual flight needs to be not longer than 10 meters for the gradient, up to 1 in 15, and not more than 5 meters for the gradient 1 in 12. Width of at least 900 millimeters with landing top and bottom, and a turn and between flights of at least 1200 millimeters long. If the approach is external and stepped again, it needs to be minimum 900 millimeter wide with a landing of at least 900 millimeter length every 1.8 meter rise. Have suitable nosings and minimum 200 millimeter thread with riser between 75 and 150 millimeters, so conveniently resembling brick thicknesses. One-sided grippable handrail needs to be put in place whenever the change of level is at least 3 rises. Handrail needs to exceed 300 mm past the top and bottom nosing and be at the height of between 850 and 1 meter. Communal entrances should be at least 775 mm wide and easy to traverse by a wheelchair. Communal lifts should be provided whenever possible and should be suitable for wheelchair use. Have a landing of at least 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter in front of the lift door. Load capacity to at least 400 kilograms. Doors opening at least 800 millimeters. The car space should be of at least 900 millimeters by 1250 millimeters. Controls at least 400 millimeters away from the inside of the front wall at height between 900 and 1200 millimeters. Have tactile indicators outside and inside, as well as signaling that it works when we press the button. If it serves more than 3 floors, it should inform us visually and audibly about the reached story. It should remain open for at least 5 seconds and have an override button working for 3 seconds. The document says that lifts to BSEN 8170 Type 1 specification will satisfy the requirement. Communal stairs should meet requirement K of general access stairs if there is no lift, and be at least of an utility type in line with requirement K when there is a lift present. Section 1B regulates private entrances and spaces within the dwelling. Entrance should be leveled and traversable by a wheelchair whenever possible, and be step free whenever possible. It should be of, if we got steps, there should be of maximum 150 millimeter rise and align with the threshold. Clean opening remains at 775 millimeter with circulation areas, and internal doorway should be between 750 and 800 millimeters minimum width, depending on the nature of the access to the door. Less when the access is head on, and more otherwise. Corridors in similar fashion should be between 900 and 1200 millimeters, but not less than 750 millimeters at localized obstructions like radiators. These obstructions cannot be opposite doors and no longer than 2 meters. 2 meters, that'd be quite small. Steps between the habitable rooms at the entrance story should be avoided whenever possible. Water closet facilities should be provided on entrance story where there are habitable rooms or on the primary story otherwise. There should be sufficient space in the WC facility, at least 45 centimeters either side of the center line of the toilet and 750 millimeters to the front of the water closet basin. It can be a bit less, 400 millimeters to one side if access is oblique. Doors should open outwards, and generally the minimum dimensions are around 150 millimeters for frontal access and 1600 millimeters for oblique access. Doors opening can infringe on the water closet basin by as much as 250 millimeters, and similarly can the sink with the trap at the edge of 750 millimeter zone. For the ease of operation of switches, sockets, bells, etc., this should be at the zone between 450 and 1200 millimeters above the floor. Consumer units at 1350 millimeters to 1450 millimeters. So that is the simple and most common set of requirements. Now we will move to optional requirement M4 category 2 dwellings, where considerations are pretty much the same, but the dimensions and features of the dwellings are more suitable for people with a wider range of mobility issues and the building is primed for future functionality and accessibility upgrades. Section 2A follows the same reach of consideration as did Section 1. The circulation and access areas need to be sufficient for the purpose. The approach routes need to be step-free and as gentle as possible, but if principal private entrance cannot be reached without the stairs, a suitable alternative step-free access to the dwelling needs to be provided. If the approach is communal and rises by at least 300 mm, there also should be a stepped access available. Private approaches should be 900 mm wide generally, but can be down to 750 taking into consideration localized obstructions. Communal paths with dimension extend to 1200 mm and 1050 mm wide respectively. Naturally, ground surface needs to be suitable and any gates en route should have a minimum of clear opening width of 850 mm with a 300 mm nip to the leading edge of the gate to allow for easier access to operate it. The document gives us provisions for the length of ramps depending on the gradient, starting with as little as 2 meters for the steepest gradient of 1 in 12 to 10 meters at 1 to 20. And here again, the width of the flight will depend on whether it is a private or communal ramp, and it will be either 900 or 1200 mm. Landing requirements remain as they were before, needed at the top and bottom between flights and changes of directions of at least 1200 mm in length. Stairs forming an additional route should be uniform of between 150 mm and 170 mm rise and 280 mm to 425 mm goings. Steps with suitable nosings at least 900 mm wide and landings should have a handrail of suitable dimensions. The typical height of 850 to 1000 mm on at least one side for stairs not wider than 1 meter. Handrail should extend 300 mm past the top and bottom nosing. Parking spaces, when provided in a private setting, should be capable of accommodating at least one space of 3.3 meter width. Communal parking spaces to blocks of flats should have at least one parking place close to the entrance with a 900 mm wide clear access zones to one side and dropped curb, and all the features to make it easy to use, meaning suitable surface, level or shallow gradient approach and step-free access to the building. Drop-off points follow similar expectations in terms of surface step-free character and being as level as possible, close to entry point, and when dropped curb is present, it is at least 1 meter wide and slope no more than 1 in 12. Communal entrances need to be covered to a minimum of 1200 mm width and 900 mm depth and be formed by a landing of at least 1.5 by 1.5 meter, clear of the swing of any door and automatically illuminated with fully diffused light by the dusk till dawn. Doors or gates should be of at least 850 mm clear opening. Like previously, we need to think about the space on both sides of the doors to provide easy access, and this can be achieved by the nip at least 300 mm wide to the leading edge, creating a space around the swing of the door for at least 1200 mm and the 200 mm reveal maximum. In case of porches or lobbies, the doors should be at least 1.5 meters apart and do not swing against each other. The accessible threshold is a must. A surface of proper quality is too. Door controls should be 900 mm to a meter over the floor and at least 300 mm away from any projected corner. All remaining communal doors on the way should meet these provisions well, except the one for external parts of such doors. Communal lifts should have a landing of 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter in front of the doors. Lift type 2 to BSEN 81-10 is said to be sufficient. The car needs to be minimum of 1.1 meter wide and 1.4 meter deep to allow a wheelchair with a driver in. Minimum door opening of 800 mm. Lift controls at between 900 to 1200 mm above the car floor and a minimum of 400 mm away from the inside of the front wall. and a dwell time of at least 5 seconds. Communal stairs should meet the general access stair requirements of Requirement K. Section 2b now deals with private entrances and space within the dwelling that includes other external doors and key elements within the dwelling. Principal private entrances and alternative entrances where step-free access cannot be achieved to the former should have a covered landing. Landing should be at least of 1.2 meter by 1.2 meter and the covering at least 900 mm width and 600 mm depth. Lighting should be diffused and working from dusk till dawn. The door opening should be of at least 850 mm clear width. If doors are double, the leading leaf should maintain that dimension. The 300 mm nib creating space for at least 1200 mm and the reveal of max 200 mm is also applicable here. Accessible threshold and at least 1500 mm of clear space between the doors of porches or lobbies is also a must. Same requirement except for landings is also applicable to all other doors associated with the dwelling. Circulation areas will need to be now either of at least 900 mm width for halls and landings and corridors not less than 750 mm at points of obstructions. Obstructions can be of maximum 2 meters in length and are restricted to areas remote of doors. 1.5 meter obstruction-free zone is required at the doors opening for an uninterrupted maneuvering, and 300 mm is the minimum distance at the corners, including for the nib at the entrance story. Nib needs to extend by at least 800 mm in such cases. Doors clear width will depend on the corridor space and the way we approach the corridor. So head on, and when the corridor is at least 1200 mm wide, it can be as low as 750 mm, extending to 800 mm, where the corridor is 900 mm and we approach it orthogonally. Private stairs and changes of levels are rather straightforward. There shall be no obstruction to use of rooms and facilities at the entrance story and avoided whenever possible on all other stories. To be able to fix a stair lift, the stair needs to be at least 850 mm wide, 450 mm above the pitch line of the stairs, including the newel post, and to meet Part K requirements. Now living, kitchen and eating areas should be usable and easy to access. There should be a living area at the entrance story, which is either a living room, dining room or kitchen diner. To move freely, there should be at least 1200 mm clear space provided about the kitchen units and appliances. Glazing to a principal window of the principal living area starts at a maximum of 850 mm above the floor level, or at the minimum height compliant with the requirements of Part K for guarding two windows. The bedroom should also be accessible and allow at least 750 mm wide route from the doors to the window. There should be at least one double bedroom with 750 mm on all sides of the bed, but headrest. And all single and twin bedrooms should provide this 750 mm clear width to one side of each bed. One way to show compliance is to show it on dimensions drawings using dimensions for the furniture as put together in Appendix D of the document. It is fine to have a bedside table as long as it is not deeper than 600 mm from the wall. Sanitary facilities also have provisions for more accessible use. Water closet, cloak rooms, bathrooms and shower rooms, walls, ducts and box sinks should be strong enough to support grab rails, seats and other adaptations up to 150 kilograms per meter squared. Water closets on the entrance story should provide step-free access and perhaps showering facilities. For some wheelchair users in the dwellings should have a room containing WC and the basin, doors opening outwards in all those circumstances. In 2 or 3 story dwellings with 1 or 2 bedrooms, water closets should follow the recommendation of Category 1 dwelling, but when there is 3 or more bedrooms, we need to think about the provision of level shower and dimensions of clear zones that will allow use of the room by less mobile people. The minimum dimensions of the zones are given by the document. We generally think about the movement of a 110 millimeters long by 700 millimeters wheelchair in and out of spaces and about the rooms. If there is an accessible toilet on the entrance story as well as water closets, cloakroom, the water closet may comply with the requirement of category 1 dwelling. Similarly, for bathrooms, the document gives us clearances for our layouts. It tells us that on the story with a double bedroom, aka principal bedroom, there should be a bathroom containing water closet, a basin and a bath. And we should mind that if there is no other rooms with the potential level access shower in the house, such should be considered for that bathroom. Now, services and controls need to be conveniently placed for people with reduced reach. Consumer units at 1350 to 1450 millimeters height, switches, sockets, stopcocks and controls at 450 to 1200 millimeters and at least 300 millimeters away from internal corners. Window handles in a principal living area at between 450 to 1200 millimeters above floor area, or by remote switch at the same level, and all other windows similarly, but up to 1400 millimeters above floor area. The boiler and other controllers should generally be positioned at between 900 and 1200 millimeters, except for the radiator or cooker hoods. Now, section 3 deals with category 3 dwellings, which are wheelchair user friendly but otherwise follow the same consideration as we already covered in category 1 and 2 houses. So, section 3A goes on to tell us about the approach to the dwelling. Similar to the previous one, we address the access to the dwelling from outside as far as the drop-off point. Naturally, the route needs to be convenient for the wheelchair user, meaning no steps, of good surface, and may need to include step-free mobility scooter parking if such is provided. If the approach is communal and rises over 300 millimeters, 2 steps, we are obliged to provide such as an alternative route. The approach route should be at least 1200 millimeters wide. Any localized obstructions are no longer than 2 meters and do not happen at the change of direction or opposite of or near the doorways. We need to think 1.5 meter width and depth space for turning and passing about, but at a maximum of 10 meters apart. External approaches should be lit with diffuse light from dusk till dawn. Any gate between the footway and the main communal or private entrance should have a minimum of 850 mm clear space with 300 mm nib to the leading edge and 200 mm nib to the following edge. External and internal ramps should be at the gradient between 1 in 20 to 1 in 15, up to 10 meter length at the former and 5 meters at the latter. Landing as necessary should be provided in addition to the top, bottom and at the change of direction and need to be at least 1200 millimeters long. For additional step routes, the steps should be between 150 and 170 millimeters in rise and between 280 and 425 millimeters in going. Max flights remain the same at 1.8 meter rise, with nosings of minimum 900 millimeter clear width, minimum 900 millimeter long landings and railings for all flights of 3 steps or more. Single steps should be avoided. Grippable handrails should be at least at the level between 800 and 1 meter and extend beyond top and bottom nosing by at least 300 millimeters. Car parking and drop-off points should allow the wheelchair user to be mobile around it. Parking space needs enough space on both sides of the car and allows access to the boot in a communal setting, but to one side and the boot in a private setting. The surface should be proper and leveled with a minimum of a headspace at 2.2 meter. Space can be shared between parking places. Drop-off point should be leveled with a good surface and dropped curb, not too steep, 1 in 15 maximum, and at least 1 meter wide and reasonably flush with the ground. Communal entrance should be covered with a minimum of 1.2 meter by 1.2 meter and have a 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter landing. 1.5 meter turning circle behind the closed doors is required, well lit with diffuse lighting from dusk till dawn, either switched on automatically during the dark times or motion activated when approached. The clear 850mm opening applies here also to the leading doors. 300mm nibs naturally extended for 1800mm, and 200mm nib is also required to following edge of the door. Also, the 200mm max reveal to the leading edge applies here. The threshold needs to be of an accessible type, and there should be at least 1500mm space between the door swings in case of porches and lobbies. Ground surface should not impede the wheelchair user, and we need to provide power assistance if the doors require more force to open. The document limits that force to 30 newtons from 0 to 30 degrees opening, and then 22.5 newtons from 30 to 60 degrees. Controls for such doors should be at least about 900 millimeters to a meter above the floor level, and at least 300 millimeters away from any projecting corner. All other community doors should follow these requirements. Well, except for the requirements that deal with external approaches, that there is really no need for a canopy indoors, you know. Communal lifts are generally fine if follow the BSEN 81-70 Type 2 specification. Otherwise, the landing in front of the lift doors should be at least 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter. The lift car is 1100 by 1400. Doors have a clear opening of at least 800 millimeters. Landing and car controls are at 900 to 1200 millimeters high over the floor and a minimum of 400 millimeters from the inside of the front wall. Dwell time remains at 5 seconds. Communal stairs should follow requirement K for general access stairs. Now, we move on to section 3b, which deals with private entrances and spaces within and connected to the dwelling. To show compliance with special and functional provisions for the wheelchair adaptable or accessible dwellings, we'll be obliged to show that on dimensioned and furnished layouts to a scale of 1 in 100 at least. Furniture sizes are given in the document in Appendix D. Private entrances should be suitable for wheelchair use, which will generally mean a level external landing of 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter dimensions and clear of door swings. Lighted with diffuse light when needed, and we also need to think about the turning circle inside of the door swing of at least 1.5 meter when the doors are closed. A typical 300mm nib creating a niche of at least 1800mm needs to be provided at the leading edge of the doors, and at least 150mm to the hinge side to allow for the installation of a cage for the letterbox. The door clear opening is maintained at 850mm. 200mm nib needs to be provided on the approach side of the doors and maintained for 1500mm. The maximum of 200mm reveal at the leading edge of the doors needs to be assured, as needs the 1500mm between the door swings in the porch or lobby type arrangements. There are a few more requirements that are depicted quite nicely in the document diagram. The document also informs us that all other entrance doors will need to meet these requirements, excluding ones for the external primary entrance approach, you know, canopies and landings and all. Now, halls and door widths are to be a minimum of 1 meter 50mm wide, unless not approached heads-on. Then it needs to be 1200mm wide at least. Obstructions cannot occur opposite doors, near doors or at corners, and cannot be longer than 2 meters, reducing the clearance to minimum of 900mm clear width. All doors are now of uniformly 850mm clear opening, irrespective of their position. All doors need to have the 300mm leading edge nib, and 200 mm following edge nip, and be at least 800 mm away from the corner with its leading edge, or capable of providing 1.5 meter turning circle between the door and the opposite edge. We now need to provide wheelchair storage and transfer space between the home and the outdoor wheelchair. The space should be of minimum 1100 mm depth and 1700 mm width, with a space of at least 1200 mm in front of it. It should have power socket. That power socket should be provided to charge the wheelchair. In the adaptable home, this can be utilized for other purposes, provided there will be no need for structural works or services relocation at the point of adaptation or reduction of storage space below the required minimums. This requirement is general for any adaptable part of the dwelling. We can use it for other purposes, but it should be readily available for the change for the adaptation once needed. General storage provision requirements is starting at 1.5 meters square for one bedroom, up to 4 meters square at 6 bedrooms, growing 0.5 meters square, half a meter square per each bedroom. Understairs counts as 1 meter squared. Any space with head height lower than 900 millimeters does not count, and between the height of 900 and 1.5 meter counts as 50%. For the wheelchair adaptable dwelling, we need to think lift between the circulation spaces on each story and the liftway of at least 1.1 meter by 1.65 meter internally, with ideally a circulation space in front of it of at least 1.5 meter circle. The space can be utilized in the meantime, but as was the case with the wheelchair storage, it needs to be easily formed without any major work to the building. When the dwelling is wheelchair accessible, the lift needs to be put in place, and the 1.5 meter circulation space in front of the lift is a must. In a two-story dwelling, a lift to BS 5900 or a lift platform to BSEN 81-41 may be sufficient. When it comes to the private stairs and changes of level within the dwelling, it should be good enough for the ambulant disabled person to move up and down, assisted by a stair lift when needed. Generally, stairs should follow the requirements K, but a minimum of 850 mm width needs to be provided, measured at 450 mm above the pitch line of the stairs. Have stair lift charging sockets at top and bottom, and generally there should be no steps between spaces at any given level. Now, habitable rooms. Living areas to be usable need to have a convenient transfer between the principal private entrance, water closet, and the living space. The principal living area will need to be located within the entrance story. We will need to make sure the minimum combined internal floor area of living, dining, and kitchen space is somewhere between 25 meters square and 37 meters square for between 2 and 8 bed spaces, so 2 meters square per additional bed space in between. Glazing to a principal window should start at a maximum of 850 millimeters above the floor level. In kitchen and eating areas, we again think in the dwelling for the consideration of wheelchair adaptable or wheelchair accessible. In the former, we need to ensure the dwelling can be changed relatively easily to become wheelchair accessible, and in the latter, well, you guessed it, it needs to be accessible. The kitchen and eating areas should be in one room or directly connected to each other, and there is sufficient space to maneuver the wheelchair, meaning 1.5 meter wide approach to kitchen units and appliances, and the same between them. The length of the worktops will vary between the adaptable and accessible. The difference between 1800 millimeters and the sizing for adaptable dwelling starts at 4330 millimeters, so over 4 meters. 4 meters and a foot. For 2 bed spaces up to 6730 millimeters for 6 to 8 bed spaces. The document gives us a handy diagram with more explanation. When the kitchen becomes accessible, we then need to realize the person has a cooking and food washing, food prep area adjustable to the height and that they will not suffer injury while using it. That section of the worktop should be at least 2.2 meters long, with a space underneath for the wheelchair user, with the sink thermally insulated to protect the person's legs from scalding. The sink should not be more than 150 millimeter deep. Tap should be easy to operate with levers. We ought to think about the space to place items when taking them out of the appliances, and the documents require at least 400 millimeters of the worktop space for that purpose. Drainage and water supply should be adaptable and flexible and have isolated valves. Typically, the worktop level will need to be adjustable between 700 and 950 mm above the floor level. For bedrooms, there is also a handy diagram for principal bedrooms shown in the document that gives us the required access space between the sides and front of the bed of at least 1 meter, 600 mm depth of bedside tables, and 1.2 by 1.2 maneuvering square at the door entrance and corners of bed. One bedroom needs to be close to the accessible bathroom, but all bedrooms should be accessible. The base requirement is to provide a 750 mm wide access between the doors to the window. The principal bedroom should be no further than a single story away from the entrance story and be minimum of 13.5 meters squared and 3 meter wide, clear of obstructions. Similarly, every other double or twin bedroom which can be 1 meter square smaller and the single bedroom can go down to 8.5 meters square, being at least 2.5 meter wide. Ceilings should be strong enough to accommodate a 200 kilogram capacity hoist. All but principal bedrooms can have 1 meter access to one side of the bedroom, and the dimensions for furnishings should follow that from Appendix D of this document. Sanitary facilities consideration will be the same again. We need to cater to disabled people, and the building will need to be ready for adaptation or be accessible from the word go. We will face dimensional requirements, the minimum number of bathrooms per number of bedrooms, that the bathrooms with level access showers are designed as wet rooms. Ducts, walls and boxings to every water closet, bath and shower will need to be strong enough to accommodate grab rails, seats and other adaptations. The required strength is again 150 kilograms per meter squared. Similarly, the ceilings will need to be capable of holding a hoist lifting 200 kilograms. The level of water closet pan should be at minimum 400 millimeters in height. Basins and sinks should be wall hung at 775 to 850 millimeters above the floor finish, with clear zone underneath to allow access for the wheelchair. We should avoid stacks and soil pipes within the bathroom, but if it is unavoidable, it should be next to the water closet. Regarding the number of water closets or cloakrooms, we start at the default of 1 bathroom with level access shower up to 3 bed spaces, and then add a separate water closet for 4 bed spaces and walk-in shower, and a bath at 5 bed spaces for single-story dwellings. Single bed space is considered as a room between 8.5 meters squared and 12.5 meters squared. 2 or 3 story dwellings will follow suit. Water closet facilities on the entrance story. Well, it is important to have an appropriate water closet in the entrance story, right? In the gist, it needs to be large enough and be designed as a wet room with a level access shower. The wet room and that water closet may, however, be accommodated by 2 separate rooms. The door to water closet should be opening outwards though. There are really handy diagrams showing the minimum requirement for both adaptable and accessible toilets, but we always need to keep in mind, if we do an adaptable water closet, it needs to be easily transformed into an accessible one. With bathroom facilities alike, this can be arranged in different ways, and depending on the adaptable or accessible nature of the room, will have ever so slightly different requirements. Again, diagrams are shown in the document that depict distances and arrangements for us. Dwellings up to 4 bed spaces should have a minimum of 1 bedroom that contains a water closet, a basin and an installed level access shower, with an option for a later installation of a bath, unless that is provided elsewhere in the room or another bathroom. However, the level access shower bathroom should be on the same level as is the principal double bedroom. In the gist, we need to be able to wash and bathe safely and provide enough access to facilities in line with the number of bed spaces, meaning people that may require the facilities at the same time may need to be given the opportunity to do so. Services and controls should be conveniently placed so that the consumer units, that means for the consumer units it is between 1350 to 1450 millimeters above floor level, with switch sockets, stopcocks and controls at 700 to 1 meter. Accessible and away from inside corners by at least 700 millimeters. This does not include radiator controls, obviously. Kitchen appliances need isolators located at similar range. The handle to at least 1 window in the principal living area should be at similar height, and the remaining windows between 450 and 1200 millimeters. All can be, though, controlled remotely as an alternative. Door handles, locks, latches and catches should be both easy to grip and use and at 850 to 1 meter height. Light switches should be at individual plates should have individual plates unless of a wide rocker or full plate fitting type. Switches to double sockets should be positioned externally. We should provide a door entry phone with remote door release facility in the main living space and the principal bedroom. Also, the bedroom should be prepared for the installation of bed head controls. A telephone and a power socket should be positioned together in the main living space. Taps and bathroom controls should be suitable for one-hand operation by a person with a limited grip. Boiler controls should occupy space between 900 and 1200 millimeters, and radiator controls between 450 and 1 meter. Now, private outdoor space. Well, every outdoor space should accommodate a turning circle of 1.5 meter, free of any door swings. Paths should be at least 1050 millimeter wide, terminated again with that 1.5 meter turning circle. Gates and doors should be at least 850 millimeters wide, with 300 millimeters and 200 millimeters functional nips to both sides, similar to other provisions, and the paving, obviously, should be of suitable surface and not too steep. So this is it, folks, the approved document M, Access to and Use of Building, Volume 1, Dwellings. Let's sum it up section by section. Section 0, Introduction. This section introduces the document scope, which applies to new dwellings and material alterations but excludes extensions. The document outlines access and usability requirements for dwellings, categorized into 3 sections: visitable dwellings, section M4.1, accessible and adaptable dwellings, M4.2, and wheelchair user dwellings, M4.3. It is important to check for any optional requirements attached to planning permission, and building regulations should be followed alongside the Equality Act and other relevant codes. We are informed that in case of conflict, Part M takes precedence over Part K. Section 1 deals with Category 1, visitable dwellings. Visitable dwellings ensure reasonable access for disabled individuals who can walk to and use the dwelling's facilities. A toilet must be accessible on an entry or principal story if there is a habitable room on that level. Access to the bathroom should be step-free, and switches or outlets must be reachable for people with limited reach. This section ensures basic usability for visitors with mobility impairments. Section 1.8 treats on approach to that dwelling. The approach to the dwelling must provide safe and convenient access, being at least 900 mm wide, unobstructed and of non-slip character. If ramps are necessary, they must meet specific gradient and length requirements of the flight and have appropriate alternative step route. Where communal entrances are provided, they must be wheelchair accessible with a width of at least 775 mm, and communal lifts should accommodate wheelchairs with suitable landings, doors and controls as per specified standards. Section 1b goes on to talk about private entrances and spaces within the dwelling. Private entrances should be level where possible and allow wheelchair access. Internal doorways must meet minimum width requirements for circulation, around 750 to 800 mm, while corridors must allow easy movement, avoiding steps where feasible. Water closet facilities on the entry or principal story must provide sufficient clearance for wheelchair access with outward opening doors. Electrical fixtures must be installed at accessible heights for ease of use. Section 2, Category 2, deals with accessible and adaptable dwellings. Category 2 focuses on dwellings that can accommodate occupants with diverse needs, including older or disabled people, and be adaptable over time. The design should allow for future modifications, such as the addition of grab rails or stair lifts, without significant alterations to the fabric of the building. These provisions are applied where specified in planning approval. In addition, Section 2a, Approach to the dwelling. The external approach must provide step-free accessible paths similar to Category 1, but with added flexibility for future adaptation. Ramps, entrances and circulation routes should support adaptability, ensuring that future changes to dwelling to meet specific accessibility needs are simple and straightforward. It is vital for long-term usability as occupant needs evolve and change. In Section 2b, Private entrances and spaces within the dwellings. Internal spaces must be designed to allow straightforward adaptation to meet the future needs of disabled or aging occupants. Door widths, circulation areas and bathrooms should be flexible to accommodate aids and adaptations. The focus is on ensuring that spaces can easily be modified as needs change, provided greater accessibility and usability over the dwelling's lifespan. Now moving to Section 3 that deals with Category 3 wheelchair user dwellings. Well, here dwellings in this category must either be adaptable for wheelchair users or fully wheelchair accessible from the onset. This includes ensuring access to and usability of all facilities within the dwelling, but wheelchair users. Category 3 requirements override Category 2 if planning specifies compliance, ensuring wheelchair users have sufficient access. In Section 3a, approach to the dwelling, we are told that approach routes for wheelchair user dwellings must ensure step-free access from the parking or external areas. All external and internal approaches should be fully accessible, ensuring safe movement from entry points to the dwelling. Ramps, stairs and lifts must be designed to accommodate wheelchair users, adhering to specified standards for size, clearance and usability. Section 3b talks about private entrances and spaces within the dwellings. Private entrances must provide level access for wheelchairs, with doorways, circulation spaces and rooms designed for full wheelchair maneuverability. Bathroom and kitchen layouts should be adaptable or pre-configured to meet the needs of wheelchair users, including appropriate heights for controls, fixtures and fittings. The design ensures that wheelchair users can fully inhabit and use the dwelling without additional modifications. In the next episode, we will move to Approved Document M, Access to and Use of Buildings, Volume 2, Buildings Other than Dwellings. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that the consideration of the Approved Document M, Access to and Use of Buildings Volume 1, Dwellings, are clear for you now. If you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email. I am more than happy to help you out. In Bitna, we deal with planning, designing and managing of your projects, and we are always glad to facilitate a free initial consultation to steer you in the right direction. Visit www.bitna.co.uk and reach out to us. Whether your question is if we can help you with your project or what should I do, we will be able to give you a piece of non-obligatory advice. At Bitna, we help our clients design and execute their dream homes or investments. If your building is falling apart, we can also help investigate the reasons behind it and to provide you with an appropriate strategy, design and specifications for the repair. Thank you again for listening. Please voice up your opinions. I'm waiting for you on LinkedIn and I want to hear from you. See you next week. Bitna designs the world around you. Toodaloo!